everybody, it's Josie here. I am going to be doing a video which I've probably talked about quite a bit, a kind of an Alice in Wonderland comparison video. So I love Alice in Wonderland as a story. It's something that I've loved kind of from an early age, and when I reread it as an adult, I kind of had different thoughts and opinions on it. So I think while I was younger, it was definitely more of a whimsical, fun, kind of a weird story, and it kind of sweet and just a bit of a fun romp. And then when I got older and read it again, I started to, and maybe it's just me, my warped brain, but I started to see a lot of kind of darker themes and real kind of commentary on power, on being different, on just kind of relations, and some of the things made me feel a little bit uncomfortable, even the way Alice interacts with some of the characters, the Mad Hatter, the White Rabbit. A lot of it, I think, can be seen from a slightly darker, more sinister angle. Certainly that's the way I interpret it. Also, if you look at kind of the Red Queen, she's quite awful. I mean, she's going around, you know, chopping people's heads off, and I realise that half of the people she's killing are playing cards, but it's still quite a sinister, kind of dark character. So little wonder, I think, that there are a lot of retellings of Alice in Wonderland. Now, there are some that are kind of sweeter and more whimsical, but then I have noticed that there are a lot of sort of darker retellings of Alice in Wonderland, and I would say those are the ones that I gravitate towards. And I've got some books here. So I've got 5 books that are all based on Alice in Wonderland, essentially Alice in Wonderland retellings, and they all look at the story slightly differently. And I've got ones that I really like, one that's sort of in the middle, and then 2 that I really disliked. And I think what I've picked up from this is I prefer the slightly darker versions of Alice in Wonderland. So let me go to the ones I liked first, and then I'll explain why. So the first one that kind of kicked off a lot of this train of thought and kicked off the idea for the video as well is this one over here. It's Alice by Christina Henry. Now, this book really takes the Alice story and characters to a dark place. And, I mean, trigger warnings, is not the easiest book to read, particularly for sexual assault and rape. And mental health, really, because it starts off with Alice and Hatcher, who is the other main character, being locked up in a mental institution. And it kind of takes this premise that Alice sort of went to Wonderland, and when she came back and told people about it, her mother locked her up in the insane asylum because clearly she was mad, because she was spouting things about white rabbits and caterpillars and, you know, clearly you're a bit unstable. So that's interesting, that kind of take on, you know, a girl coming back, and it's not like, oh, that's sweet, you had this whimsical fairy tale kind of dreamlike experience, and people seeing it as a dreamlike fun experience, but rather it being taken as some sort of mental illness. And then with these characters, so she was raped by the White Rabbit, and the characters, so the caterpillar, the white rabbit, the walrus, they're all kind of, because it's set almost in a weird sort of a modern-y, I'd say almost urban fantasy kind of a setting, where they are crime bosses, essentially, and they all rule different parts of the city. And they're really not nice people, and particularly they profit of women, so prostitution, and the buying and selling of women as a commodity. And I found that really interesting as a take on that story, and it made me kind of re-look at the interactions that Alice actually has with these characters within the story. It was really fascinating, and I think this works really well. Like I said, this is definitely for an adult audience, and, you know, obviously trigger warnings, but I think it really works well to take that story and explore kind of the darkness within it. This is also not set in Wonderland, which I quite liked. I think a lot of retellings and stories, they just take you back to Wonderland, kind of rehash Wonderland. And what I liked about this is that it actually took you out of Wonderland, and took these characters and reset them and reset their personalities as well, and like I said, took them to quite a dark place. Now the second book, so there's another book in the series that Christina Henry has written, and it's this one here. It's called The Red Queen. I'm not holding that properly. Red Queen. Now this one follows on from where Alice left off, So I won't tell you too much of that story because we'll spoil it. But in essence, this kind of takes you to Wonderland, but not. So it's kind of a version of Wonderland. And it's a story, it's a little bit of an origin story for the Red Queen. It's an interesting one. So in this one, Alice is more powerful, but I still preferred the first book, just as a story. I think the story wasn't as great. It was a little bit, I found it a little bit wishy-washy. I wasn't, one of the storylines that ended in Alice that I was hoping would get continued here didn't, and Christina took it in a different direction. So I wasn't particularly in love with the second book. It just didn't feel like as much thought and imagining went into this one than into this first one. That's just my opinion. But Alice I really liked. So again, on that kind of slightly darker theme, the other retelling that I love is this one over here. It's A Blade So Black by L.L. McKinney. And this book is taking the Alice myth. So the idea that Alice is a real person living in the real world in America, I think it's Chicago, and she fights nightmares that come up from essentially Wonderland and that attack humans, and she fights and defeats these nightmares. And what I like about this is it's kind of, I think it was billed as a Buffy the Vampire Slayer meets kind of Alice in Wonderland story, and it really is. This Alice is kick-ass, and she takes no prisoners, and she's really, I really like that. She's really fantastic. So I love that take on it. And again, we have her going down into this kind of version of Wonderland, but we also have sort of topside in kind of the real world. So I think playing around with that setting really works. I think L.L. McKinney's really pushed the boat out on some of the characters as well. It's not that really, really familiar Wonderland kind of cast of characters. She's really made the story her own and really made something different and kind of action adventure and again a little bit dark out of the story, and I think that works exceptionally well. Out of all of the retellings that I've read, this is definitely my favourite. And I'm really hoping that there's going to be a sequel this year, because this came out in 2018 for this book, because it was so much fun. I think when I did my review of this book, I did say the beginning bit of the book where Alice essentially trains and learns to be this kind of kick-ass dream nightmare slaying woman. There isn't that much build up, so I would have liked to have seen more of that going on, like telling us how she kind of got there. Maybe that'll sort of happen in the second book as almost a backstory, but nevertheless, when the action kicks in and she goes down to Wonderland and she meets the characters, I really love this. There's also a great little side romance, a female-female romance brewing in this one, which I like. And this one is a lot about friendship as well. So her friends in kind of the real world, how her being Alice affects them and how they support her. And it's really also about friendship, which I think is a great element in this book. And I think in the Alice in Wonderland story, I don't see a lot of elements of true friendship. You know, you've got the Cheshire Cat, you've got White Rat, but it's all a bit, yeah, I don't really see many aspects of real friendship, whereas in this book, you do, which I really, really love. So I think for my personal taste, this is probably the most successful retelling that I've read to date on Alice in Wonderland. That's just different enough, but still kind of gives you that slight core, that kernel of Wonderland and the mythology around it, but really takes it in its own direction and makes its own story. And I think, yeah, I think this one is really, really successful. Now, to the ones I didn't like. So this first one, I had to DNF at one point because it just drove me mad. It was so boring. So it's this one over here. It's called After Alice. And what this one does, it just basically takes Alice's friend Dora and basically sends her down the rabbit hole after Alice. So Alice has disappeared, Dora is going to look for her, and Dora falls down the rabbit hole. And it was just boring. And again, there's no kind of new take on it. And I think this is what's so successful about these other books, is that they've taken that concept, that kind of central concept, and made something interesting and innovative out of it, whereas with this, there isn't. I just feel like it's a rehashing of the story. Also, I hated the writing in this book. But it just, yeah, it just left me incredibly cold. So I found this was very unsuccessful because all you're doing is rehashing Wonderland but just putting another person in it. And I didn't like that. I think that's when retellings become just straight up almost copies of the original. And then the other one I didn't like, and this is going to be quite controversial because I know a lot of people really like this book, and that's this one over here, Heartless, by Marissa Meyer. It's a great book. I'm kind of sad I have to get rid of the book because I've got it upside down. I'm kind of sad I have to get rid of the book because it's actually really beautiful. But I didn't like it. The main character, Kath, in this book, so this book is meant to be a origin story for the Red Queen. And the main character, Kath, she loves baking and all she wants to do is be a baker. And her parents are essentially pushing her to marry the king of Wonderland. And thereby she will become the Red Queen. She doesn't really want to do that. She also falls in love with someone else in the story. And the whole thing, she is I find Kat's character very whiny, doesn't really stand up for herself. There were so many instances where she could just have said something or said what she wanted or stood up for herself and kind of resolved a lot of the conflict that happens in the book. I just didn't like the plot line and the pace, and I found this book annoying and boring in equal parts. The ending I didn't like. I don't like how it's resolved, even though Kath does get a bit more, I was going to say she grows some balls, but she gets a bit tougher at the end. But I didn't like the ending. And I just think it could have been done so much better. Like, the Red Queen is a really fascinating character within the story, and I think both this book and actually the Christina Henry book don't really do the origin story of the Red Queen any justice. So if you look at something like Maleficent, I think that really kind of took that origin story of the villain and made it really interesting and made her human and really gave her an interesting backstory. And I was kind of expecting Heartless to do that, and it didn't for me. So it was a real disappointment, and yeah, one that I was expecting to like as a retelling, and I didn't. I thought it was unsuccessful. So yeah, so that's my kind of thoughts on the Alice mythology, the Alice world, and kind of some of the Alice retellings. Let me know what you think, if you like Alice in Wonderland, if you've read any of these, if you have any differing opinions from me, I'd love to hear it. So until next time, happy reading, and I'll speak to you guys soon. Bye-bye.